Should I start? Yes. Very good morning. Please get a very warm welcome from the Inter-American Conference on Social Security on behalf of our Secretary General, Dr. Gibran Ramirez Reyes. Please receive a warm welcome and best regards from Daisy Corrales Diaz, our director from the CIS, thanks to whom we have this activity available on the framework of the experiences, advancements, and pending issues in addressing any disabilities. This activity is a second parter for the webinar on addressing disability and physical rehabilitation in Social Security. This time around, we are going to have representatives from Ecuador, Guatemala, and Mexico. Since the year 2011, the World Health Organization announced that around 200 million people in the world live with some sort of disability or experience any challenging issues during their physical activities. They can have decreased physical abilities, and any of us is acceptable to any kind of disability in our lifetime. That is why Social Security organizations and non-government organizations, as well as civil society, have tried to bring about responses and proposals for people to have a better performance in their daily life. We are going to address these issues and also consider that one of the main objectives is to avoid barriers from the decrease of those abilities. Addressing disabilities is also a human rights issue and should be addressed from the technological aspects up to community rehabilitation. We are going to have a panel today where we have Dr. Liliana Sanafria from Ecuador, from the technical equipment from Riadis, anthropologist Claudia Anao, from the General Coordination of the Piña Palmera Center of Attention in Mexico, Dr. Rosa Dalia from Small People in Guatemala, Dr. Sergio Lopez Ramos, Director and Founder of the Centers for Study and Development of Rent and the Huawei Studies Center in Mexico. And today we are going to have our coordinator and host, Dr. Fernando Quintanar, who is a doctor in social psychology in UNAM, Mexico, and UCL, Spain. He has a master's in health development studies, and he has a BD in psychology. Also, he has a master in gerontology from the University of Spain and research on aging studies. He has also partaken in several congresses, both national and international, and today we have him as the coordinator of this webinar. So please receive a very warm welcome. Thank you very much. The issue or the topic about disability is to be thought as more present as time goes by, and yet it has a lot of pending issues. And at the same time, we have achievements and proposals. The idea to have you here is to get to know your experiences. We are then going to begin with your participations. You will be having some time. We will be actually playing with time a little bit. We will have 20 minutes presentations, but we can make adjustments. I'm going to show you a signal that when you have 2 minutes to finish your presentation, so you can extend up to 25 minutes. We can have a Q&A section at the end, hoping for the interactions to be important and where we can also get the scope of every experience. So we are going to base on the following. We are going to have Dr. Emiliana Santafria, Dr. Liliana, Dr. Flavia, and Dr. Sergio Lopez. Thank you very much. So we give the floor to Dr. Liliana Sanafria. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to me to be able to share with you this afternoon. I would like to please get a confirmation if you can see my presentation, my slideshow. Can you put that on your screen, please? It is on. Can you see that? No, we can't. Okay, so let me go on. It's not, it doesn't matter anyway. I got the authorization granted, and so now I can share that with you. Can you see that now? Yes. Okay, great. So, as can you open that up on the full screen? Yes, it is on full screen. No, we see the slideshow, but we need you to share the slide on the full screen. The little lower square there at the right, over there. Can you see that now? Yes, move on. We can't not see the full screen, but okay. Okay, let me move on then. So, Dr. Nidalia, could you please turn off your camera? We continue with your audio, but no image right now. Thank you. Continue, please. Okay, so as we were indicator, Riadid, Riadis is the Latin American network of non-government organization with people with disabilities and their families. And this time around, we were able to make a presentation of one of our last processes that we worked at a country level, and we can promote it to be applied at a regional level. In one way or another, during the pandemic, it was very impactful. Obviously, this process was not expected by any one of us. Riadis has a commitment with spaces, particularly with mental health, worked directly during this pandemic by accompanying processes of tele-assistance for people with disabilities and a macro objective that provided to work directly initially with Pelearies for the first approach for a crisis intervention at a general level, and that became expanded in a very significant way to other mechanisms that went targeted way more than or beyond crisis intervention. And besides that, and the reason why we needed to highlight this within the space, we were able to determine some other aspects in a very significant way that were very challenging in our job. And one of them was actually the presence of violence against women and children and girls with disabilities within the different environments. What at first was a direct way of attention within the mental health area in a very important and prioritary way, we offered to expand the assistance directly to women and girls with disabilities, as was determined that one of the key factors for which we were going through is this lockdown, this social isolation that forced, one way or another, for this group of women and girls with disabilities to remain within their private spaces, in many of the cases locked down with their offenders. So we saw different strategies that for us were applied immediately and that align with the process that we were going through at that time. Let's not forget that the pandemic season for us, in a way, was a condition that forced us to remain socially distanced, both for those who were necessary to intervene and those people who were intervened. So, one of the strategies to work with was to incide with telepsychology, and not just through the network media, but also with phone calls with very particular and specific cases that were prioritary, where the people were not able to have contact with other persons. Mainly, we did it with the creation of an intervention model where we fundamented and directly took the approach of the rights, because regardless of the condition where the victims of violence were in a right human right approach, they needed to be addressed timely. So it is important to highlight that under pandemic conditions in Ecuador, there was a line of definition in case of emergency that, however, did not comply or meet the specific needs that were required by people at that time. During this rights approach, we reviewed the need for adaptability and reasonable adjustments to be able to work directly with women and girls. And we opted within these mechanisms for adaptability with the intervention of the community. Obviously, groups of women, local women, facilitated and supported this space in a great manner, because they were geographically closer and emotionally closer to this group of women. So that way, we worked with the incorporation of key stakeholders, which is staying in live up till until today. Once we overcame this space that impaired in most cases to carry out timely claims, the approach was set forth for the recovery of autonomy for these people, which is the space what we are at right now. At some point, Riadis led this space, and as you will be able to see later on, we had the opportunity at the time to create strategic alliances with professional groups, but also with organisms and entities that work with rights and for the defense of women and girls. Something that caught our attention, and when we talked about actions, it is important to stress that, is the fact that a woman or a girl with a disability is still invisibilized in these spaces. Although we are talking about affirmative options facing violence against women in general, specifically for women and girls with disabilities, we are remaining in invisibility. How do we address this topic? Well, first, within the first contact, Riadis has base collectives and organizations, and the first contact was always through reference. That first call, that first reference, that indicated that within a certain space or place, we needed to intervene in a crisis, firstly, and then an intervention in a more advanced process. We advanced also in contention processes, which was the approach, and that is where we focus that problem. And that's where we determined that mostly we were observing conditions of violence towards women and girls with disabilities. Nevertheless, we were also able to determine that these girls and women were not just women and girls with disabilities, but many of them were mothers or wives of people with disabilities. We do a therapeutic companionship, as is supposed to identifying the indications of the traffic light as present as an indicator on the type and frequency of violence the person was receiving. I want to stress in this point that we did not have just violence towards children and women. There were also cases of violence towards men, but in a much lower number than we were able to expect at some point. Obviously, there were other conditions linked to this factor of lockdown and social distancing that were addressed. Why is this particularly interesting in this observation for violence? Because out of the 100% of people that were addressed, from around 1,300 people, 84% were for violence issues. Once we worked with this topic of the traffic light parameter, we conformed it as a community network with a base of groups of women who had the documents, the implements, and the opportunity to intervene directly on the field. I want to stress, and it's necessary for me to do that, that unfortunately, in terms of visibilization of women and girls, there is at a national level no necessary formation for that or for that purpose. Right now, we are doing a companionship process in the intervention of very specific cases, but also the work towards following up with strategic allies. When I say that, they're professional collegiates in the field of mental health and groups of women who work towards the recovery of women in violence conditions. I see that you cannot maybe read everything, but there was an instrument drafted called Violence and Women and Children with Disabilities. This instrument, although we have generalized what kinds of violence there are, it was necessary for us to standardize. Within psychological violence, for example, we were able to visualize elements like blackmailing, ridiculizing, patronizing the victim in front of other people. Many times they were subjected to discrimination against their disability and abandonment in terms of neglect, feelings of inferiority, minus validation. And in terms of disability, we were seeing fear of losing their spouse or caregivers and their housing as well, which was directly the way that they were violented emotionally. Physical violence in terms of disability, provision, aggression, and damage to people or support to their independent life, hostility and rejection in the interaction, pushing, tossing, isolation, prohibition to use drugs or medicines, all the way up to even access to hygienic conditions like diaper changing, for example, in case it was necessary as well. Economic violence was the lowest degree of visibility. Because of the pandemic, a lot of people were within their houses and were also not acquiring or getting directly their salaries. But we had some economic violence where the caregivers, parents, spouses, or children who were taking advantage of this expense without considering the needs for people with disabilities. Sexual harassment was also predominant, and unfortunately, it is a condition that has become a part of the lives of many women with disabilities. How did this happen, or how did we do this? We had an intervention protocol where key elements like friendly language, the quality of communication, focusing on the program, and creating empathy and efficacy allowed us to reach the person. Detecting violence by applying instruments from the traffic light standardization, but also identifying key people in their life who could give them the necessary support. We were able to determine that this risk environment is a progressive one. And although given the pandemic we were able to visualize that, it is also true that this is part of the everyday life. The plan of action and follow up, where we did a psychological intervention, companionship towards a case, identification and usage of possibility to self protection. The companionship models that we were discussing about women, this was a very significant space actually, because this group of women, not necessarily with a disability, were able to do this approach and stay in touch way more than the actions that were prior to this. We, as psychologists, we would say a shadow companionship, and we continue to do that with our strategic allies. The information support at a first level with the psychoeducation and a companionship of resources, and that at some point Riadis is enhancing through the restitution of the rights of those women who were not just because of the pandemic suffering or victims of this kind of violence, and the recovery of their empowerment conditions. Now, about this, I think it is very important to notice a phrase that was one of the phases that we supported the most. In the case of women, the decision is ours too. Deciding to stop seeing ourselves as what we think we are and starting to feel the way we want to be. Today, I am free. Today, I get up and start with myself. Actually, it is a decision slogan. For women, it is very important to have it as a part of our life. Unfortunately, in the case of women with disabilities, we have many limitations. When we talk about challenges, it's precisely this. We can start raising statistics and studies and get a lot of information about what could and is actually happening inside the houses of people and women with disabilities. However, in general, for countries, women are still invisible, even from their childhood and especially during their adulthood as women. And I think that is a very significant challenge. The presence of a man within these spaces is very nutritious as long as they are that companion, that partner, that other person, that other being who is at the same level of respect of our rights, but also our obligations. Women's participation at a Latin American level of people with disabilities is still not there. We do see ourselves in these spaces. We don't see those women who have decided to raise their voices and move on. But we also have women who, within that intersectionality, they have other oppression factors like race, their ethnicity, gender conditions, their social decision as well, and sexual decisions. It is true, I have only presented a report of what was part of the work we did with Riadis in this space, but we did get a medical challenge for women to be seen definitely as people, as stakeholders and proposers of our own life story, and that public policies that are recorded and created in favor of people with a disability, they need to be mandatorily observed, that as women and children, we can also foster those. It's just that, and I am open to any questions. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, Liliana, well, Well, yeah, I have a couple of questions, and I'm going to give those questions at the end so that we'll ask all the panelists because it has to do with what you have just said as a member of RIADIS and all the work you've done in human rights. It was really considering the work that you've done in the time that searching for the work reinsertion, you know, for people with disabilities. Thank you very much, Liliana. So we'll go to the next presentation. And I have a couple of questions that I will ask whenever it's the moment. The next presentation is by Flavia Nao, the coordinator of Piña Palmera. She is an anthropologist, and as you will see during her talk, she'll be talking about her experiences and the way they've been working with this center in Oaxaca. Please, Flavia, the floor is yours. Well, hello, how are you? Thank you for the opportunity. Can you hear me? Very low, at a very low pitch, but we can hear you. Well, I hope you will be able to hear me. Yes, of course. Well, then, thank you very much for the opportunity of sharing our experience here in the topic with the strategy of rehabilitation based upon the community that we have renamed as reinsertion based in the community in a rural indigenous context. So the next slide, please. We, with the RBC IBC, we work together along a matrix. And this matrix has different axes. And each and every one of those we've been developing coordinated or along with organized civil organizations, government entities, private organizations, depending on the topic that we would have to address for the inclusion processes, the access have to do with, the first one has to do with health, which obviously is directly related to rehabilitations. With RBC and IBC, we work with any person and at any disability condition and at any age. Sorry, Flavia, we also. Sir, no, we should go with the next ones, please. So, next, please. So, these are the subtopics that have to do with the health pillar, and that we will obviously have to coordinate ourselves with the different entities because we do not work the medical issue, but the process rehabilitation process issue. Next slide, please. That has to do with education. Next, please. That has to do with the different stages, and that has to do with education inclusion, and that we also coordinate our actions with the teachers from all the regular schools where there that we have in the communities. Next, please. Next, please. Which is the support. Next, please. That has to do with all these topics that are developed within the community itself and with the participation of disabled people, and in some cases with the families that are also part of this issue. Next, please. Which is the social pillar or axis that has to do with the actions implemented in the community, and that obviously need a coordination process with different kind of entities in the community at a local level, regional and national level. Next, please, that has to do with empowering, and that has to do a lot with what the previous panelists there said, and it has to do with the strengthening of people, empowering of people, which in rural areas find themselves in a stronger discrimination situation. Next, please, and obviously that they suffer from any disability. Those are the areas we work with within this matrix. If so, you can play the video, please, because in there the experience is much more better explained. So I will thank you if you run the video. So do you have the video? There goes the video. Uh, please turn your camera off, but leave the audio on. Leave your audio on, please. Okay, there you go. Pero lo están, Peña Palmera is in the south, in the village of Cipolite. But we also work in the southern and northern mountain communities, and in the Istmus of Oaxaca. We live to grow. Peña Palmera's purpose is directed toward uh, changing people's attitudes regarding those with disabilities. We want the people who come here at Peña Palmera to be included as human beings with all their needs, abilities, and possibilities. So in here we have different work areas such as carpentry, production and rehabilitation, special care areas. So we work very hard with the environment. We produce organic fertilizer, and we also have large experimental gardens in this very same land that we have, so that families can also see how to improve their food quality in their own communities. There are people who have taken their process responsibly in Peña Palmera. Among those, we have Christian, Patty, and Mariano, and Malena. They are developing their potential. They are taking advantage of their opportunities to grow, mature, become involved, and have a social inclusion. I am Patricia Matias, and I have a poliomyelitis sequel. My disability, I became disabled when I was 2 years old, so I learned to live with my disability ever since I was a little girl. I belong to an indigenous community where there is no information. I have faced different ways of discrimination. Because I'm a woman, because I'm indigenous, and also because I belong to a family that lives in a community. We live or we face a lot of discrimination, tribal discrimination. My name is Mariano Enriquez Martinez, and I'm visually impaired. There was a moment when I wasn't able to see any further. My vision was very blur. So I went home, I spent the weekend, and I wasn't able to see anymore. Mariano came to Piña Palmera as a young boy. His family came here to accompany him. They didn't understand what was happening with Mariano, and they spoke Zapoteco. So we were not able to communicate with them to explain them the kind of actions that they had to give as a follow up at home. So little by little, Mariano was starting to develop his abilities. He was included in the local school, and in there, he was able to teach teachers how to have educational inclusion for people that suffer from disabilities, and particularly with blind people. In my job, we have sensibilization ateliers where we have them to suffer from a disability for a while, so that they will realize how hard it is. So if I hadn't come to Piña Palmera, I am 25 years old now, almost half of my life with disability and half of my life without any disability. If I hadn't come to Piña Palmera, I would be home without doing anything. So the one, two, three, four, five, six. So involve myself in politics. I live in a community which is named Miramar, and it belongs to San Pedro Pochula municipality. So, in there, they have their elections for a municipal government representation. So, in 2011, I was elected to be a supplant of the municipal representation so I could help the community. So while we are on this, I'd like to see about the disability issue in the downtown area near the church. So when the disabled are waiting to get a taxi or a private car, they can stand and wait without a problem. Piña Palmera is more than activities and services. Our activities are directed to the needs of the disabled people. So you make this thing if you want to say the word basket. We support the rehabilitation process and the process to lead an independent life, the process of a daily routine, and we inform and develop skills according to each one's abilities and provide ongoing information to the family so that they can help them constantly, those people with disabilities, and even to other community groups so that they will be aware of what to do to help change their attitude towards disabled people. Here? Where? Well, Malena came to us when she was very, very young. She grew up with us and she taught us what was important for her. How we could communicate with her when she had no language to communicate with. This evening, a little later, yeah. So since she could not walk or move on her own, she is independent on us for her development. Nowadays, she's a great example. She has a really good sense of communication, always has a smile on her face, no matter what. And she's a great example for other women with disabilities. And she's a role model for her community. So, you want me to put them here? Spread them out here? Also, they brought new movies. Oh, so you brought this. Okay. What's the price, Malena? 15 pesos? 20. Okay. In the future, she'll always be with us. He is at Piña Palmera. She completely depends on us, but she is developing her abilities with a great sense of joy. Is it correct? Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Malena. We'll see you later. Thank you very much. Bye. Oh, we sold 2 movies. Great. I can't imagine what I would do without Piña myself. I'm Christian and I have an intellectual problem. Everything's okay? Where were you? Where did you work? In the shop. Oh, in the shop. Who with? With Patty. A friend who worked here spoke with a physiologist, psychologist. She worked here because I have a cafe. So we drank some coffee and she knows Christian. She spoke to the people at Pina on my behalf. Okay, get the paper off. Christian is an example for many young people. She came here very early in Pina Palmera from very difficult situation in his life. He couldn't speak and walk, but she has developed enormously. We started with language and hearing therapy. So, and even total body message, we also use some contextual practices and give attention and perfection on her body movements. Our intention is to help him obtain his skills to lead an independent life so he will be integrated into society. Patty arrived at Pina when she was a young girl. She's been an example for so many youngsters and for many women. Last year, I began a course, a diploma course, through an organization which is called Community Ideas, which is called Community Wellness School. And we studied different topics like management, identity and leadership, gender roles, legal rights, fair trade. Odilia Alejandro Irene Bartolomeo You trusted in me, and with your emotional conflicts, your family problems, and your fears, she has overcome every challenge, and she wants to go forward every time. She's in charge of solidarity economy in Pina Palmera. Good afternoon. How are you? You're doing well, Miss Patty. Good, nice to see you. I finally come to see you. So in Pina Palmera created a place and the moment for me to promote fair trade products, and they've helped me succeed in the struggle for disabled and for women, and to help foster inclusiveness where we can give the disabled people a voice. And we've joined together with other marginalized groups. Pina Palmera is also an example of diversity, a place where people live together in different age groups and different handicaps, different cultures, different ways of thinking, different ways of living their lives. And that results in in a unique project which is directs itself to questions of gender and social justice for everyone. Well, very good. Thank you very much, Flavia. Would you like to say anything else? No, thank you. Well, we have two more questions, and I will uh, ask them at the end. So we'll go now, if there is no other thing to talk about. Now we are going to have our third speaker, Dr. Rosa Dalia, which in the on behalf of Gente Pequeña in Guatemala. So we'll listen to you, Rosa Dalia. How are you? Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm pleased to share with you. Can you please have a higher volume, please? So, ready? Okay, let's see. Now, can you hear me? Yeah, please go ahead. I was talking to you. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here because this is the very first time and the first time I was not able to talk. And I am a representative of the Council of Disabled People. You know that we can hardly hear you. I'm going to get rid of my mask now. Okay. Can you hear me well? Better? Not a lot, but that's a little bit better. Well, my volume is the highest. Okay, there's some echo. Are you having two mics at the same time? No. No, not really. I'm in the middle of heat in the council's headquarters. I don't know if you can hear me now. We can hardly hear you, but please go ahead. Well, within the experiences that we have had in the Conadi, we have had on the part of the pandemic side, we've been working hard with the training, not only talking about disabilities, but the population with disabilities, and strengthening the organizations of the civil society joined to the Comare. And within this experience, it has represented a commitment and the challenge to understand that in some way we'll be able to make changes and adapt ourselves to this new normal, and that has allowed us and has established a dialogue process between countries, dialogue between organizations and institutions. But it is a dialogue which is more like uh, to use and challenge ourselves and the use of platforms. So actually, I excuse myself because I will have to leave in a little while, because in a few minutes we'll have the last workshop that we have coordinated in the formation process. We have coordinated workshops of communication in order to be able to talk about the sign language. And this year, the 28th, we passed the sign language and is recognized as a national sign language, which has been a big challenge that has derived with the coordination of the Ministry of Education and in the elaboration of regulation and the commitment of Kumari to establish within this process of education. We have 6 workshops that I want to talk about, and this is coordinated with the Office of the High Commissioner of United Nations, and we've talked about topics with the organizations in the civically society and people, disabled professionals that are not subscribed to the CONADI, but that does not leave them away from processes of inclusion that the Council may develop or implement. Topics such as international standards of human rights and participation and consultation. We have developed principal topics for the participation and consultation of people with disabilities. We have it very clear that it is us, the people with disabilities, that we have to be the stars of this process, not only of our story on the programs and all the stories that the states try to implement, but with us, with ourselves making the decisions. Another topic, good practice of participation and consultation in the Latin American region, guidelines for consultations, experience of participation and consultation in Guatemala. We have developed another topic, which is the consultation to people, women, young people, indigenous people with disabilities. And the last one, which in a few minutes will start, is the consultation of people with intellectual disabilities, autistic people, and other things. Within all this process, we have worked from the CONARI. We have had a protocol based on the indicators and the international standards. Actually, I take advantage of these opportunity to thank Dr. Sanchez Amalia, which in its moment helped us with some ideas for the protocol. And within this protocol, I can mention how to deal, or how, because it's one of the most complex topics we have experimented, because 15% of the Guatemalan population with disabilities are working within the informal market or informal economy. So this lockdown has reduced importantly the income of all these people. So from the Employment Commission, we have generated a path of employment and reactivation of economy that has helped us with the technical training processes activated by the Ministry of Work and Social Provision and the TECAT, an entity which is a mixture, that is to say, that has donations and subventions from the state, and has given lots of courses, a variety of courses, technical courses for people with and without disabilities. CONADI has participated with this topic and the coordination articulation so that people with disabilities may participate and they would be able to take advantage of the lockdown time to be able to learn new abilities. And we have coordinated with the health ministry and the Institute of Social Security. We have implemented, and we had the technical assistance of the Higher Commissioner of United Nations, a brief guide of 7 pages that was created with the civil organization and the public entities because they are the warrantors to comply with our rights, and which in some way we will be enjoying our rights as disabled people.
Another important element that I must mention within this process of the pandemic, we managed as a country to coordinate. Of course, we were stagnated at some processes. We demanded the terms as were corresponding for the Inter-American program, where our program had the joy of having 12 months exactly as a guest country, and we were notified of the last step at a state level that you need to take in order to be able to be a part as a country member. That is very important for us because that Inter-American program where we have 22 countries, this particular program is focusing in the in training and formation of the topic of disabilities and also strengthening the region. And that program was born here in Guatemala. And here is where we had that commitment of the stance, and that's why up until today we have the possibility of having the status as a member country in terms of the system. What was left pending, and we actually need to retake and target possibly in 2021, is to retake the work we were doing in the originary language, as well as the topic of inclusive tourism or accessible tourism. And actually, Guatemala was the host in assisted tourism. And we had about 4 encounters that we're going to promote tourism at a regional level, which is where we actually got more of a hit with the pandemic. As CONAVI, in terms of the law and our mandate, we could not go directly for food access, but we created a program that goes to this kingdom. And actually, there is a program called Program 94, and that allowed us to coordinate and take actions to be able to acquire any sanitary consumable. And actually, last week we got these consumables to the people with disabilities, and we are in the process of mitigation and closure of these programs in particular that were created specifically to somehow support and safeguard this topic about prevention and contention of contagion in terms of coronavirus. And I am here, as I told you, I was very concrete, very synthetic of all of the realities we have. And with that, I will conclude. That's the experience we had of working with the Mayan Language Academy, where we worked with different campaigns of awareness and sensibilization, plus the drafting of materials in the 4 most widely spoken countries in the languages in the country, and with the Mayan Language Academy, along with the complementation of the Washington Group for the census, I can also say that this Academy of Mayan Languages was fundamental, where the relationship with the difficulties for any everyday activity through, in terms of innovation, 7.1%, in terms of mobility, 2.4%, in terms of hearing, 2.7%, concentration or reminders of key elements for this support, it's 2.2%, personal care, 1%, and language and communication, 1.5%. And I apologize. I leave it at that. I was very quick, and that's why I didn't even use the slideshow to be able to keep it as concrete as possible. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for your participation. We considered it was important to have your perspective. I understand that you are extremely busy and quite loaded with work. I think you're a good example of the challenges there are, the commitments we have, the achievements you have achieved. And I am truly sorry that given these workloads, you were not able to be there where you pointed out in whenever it was necessary. But we do have a couple questions I will make accessible to you as we did in the last session. At some point, Dr. Daisy also shared her concern to maintain contact with you because this is a starting point for a lot of the work that will be done afterwards. And actually, we're going to continue in communication with you to stay in touch. I thank you for your willingness and your readiness. Thank you for the great effort you made to be with you and actually with my workmates and colleagues who are here present today. Thank you very much. We will keep in touch with you. Thank you very much. Yes, I am at your service. Thank you very much. I want to tell you that this month we also did a very strong work because this month is month for small people awareness, and that topic actually was born in Mexico, that idea, and it was settled down as 25th of October for as the International Day for Small People. And no international organism had decreed it. So it's a very interesting exercise because we have 70 countries now, and some of these countries, like Mexico, they're countries that are, at a national level have a degree, whereas in other countries it hasn't been declared. And it's the effort of families, civil society, and people with any kind of dysplasia. We are at your service, and we have questions. You can send them to me, and I can answer you to articulate anything you need. Thank you very much. Good luck and good afternoon. Same to you. So we move on to the next presentation. We have Dr. Sergio Vitto Ramos. Sergio, can you hear us? Sergio? Thank you, Sergio. You've heard all the topics, and I know that you have a very different perspective. It is very different. I also know the work that you've been carrying out. And so I know that as a founder of this center and all of the work that you have developed throughout time, you have another possibility, another chance to say the possibilities that we have in terms of disability. So I give you the floor and go ahead. Thank you very much. I think we're having Technical difficulties here. We froze the image. Can you hear us? Sergio, can you hear us? Yes, we are having some communication issues. I can hear you now. Oh, yes, yes, we can hear you. Sergio, please go ahead and take the floor. Okay, I will try to be brief in whatever I'm going to explain. Yeah, you have time. You have time. Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of the participants who are here with us. I want to thank Dr. Fernando Quintanar, for the invitation to participate in this event of experiences, advances, and pending issues in addressing disabilities. The topic about disabilities, I will go and take it from a different perspective. It's disabilities, but it is a category that is very important for working with disabilities. And actually, I'm talking about a work that we did over the past 30 years. We found that disability could be a category that we could re-signify. What do I mean with the re-signifying? We mean that the tradition is to a tradition of doing and evidencing. It's post immediate, something that needs to be done to solve the physical aspect, and it leads to psychotherapy, to activities within the community, rehabilitation, anything pertaining rehabilitation in physical terms, the physical process, which leads me to have a reflection on these actions on emotional development growth as for emotional, sexual, for individuals. What's important for us in this process of reflection is that a human being is born in the group of humans. We say we are humans, but in order to reach that degree, that human degree, we think that it is necessary to do a body or physical work, personal work that allows us to reach that level we call in category of human. So I do say that we have two main categories. One is the body. The body is a category that we all have. We are all born with it. We have certain circumstances and the body is injured, maybe with an accident or whatever. And there is a problem anyway. We have a physical or body condition, and this condition is the body as a category. This is the first category. And then the second one is the category of whatever is physical or bodily, which is the part we build together with our life story, including society, family, the choosing by an individual, experiences, significant meanings, and everything else. When I say the conditions of these two categories, I can see that we have a very peculiar treaty. The body itself and an individual who lives in it. I will try to exemplify. For instance, I am Sergio and I have a body, and this body has an individual that is called Sergio who inhabits that body, which means that I can subject my body if I want to eat. And if my body says no more and I say, yes, you have to eat, and I make it eat that body. But that body defends itself. So it vomits. It can have like pain, like a cramp, nausea, and you can stop eating. So that means that I become an uncomfortable inhabitant of my body. It means that it's not me who is living in my body in a harmony with it. When I say that I'm not in harmony with it, there is a conflict. I am uncomfortable with my body. And it could even be that from here, from my understanding, I de-articulate from my personal process, my body. So this process, we find it with children and disabled people. And I have worked for 25 years with these children, people with disabilities, and we find this very important point. Most of them, in this sense of this disability, it cannot become a uniform body or a unity as a body. It's not a body in harmony between the individual and the body or the physical condition. So there are no messages, there's no perception, no relationship, no synergy. And this is a very important principle that we find, especially in adults who have a disability, who are in a wheelchair or they have a diplegia, paralysis, or anyone who has a symptomatic coordination problem. So the problem is how to understand this category of disability. Now we should change that category because this disability category is framed in how we understand this bodily process. So what we did was to state that this category needs to have an individual articulation. What I say, we have body and bodily are very important categories to state what we can do or what we do or what we have done. So for this circumstance, we state that it will let us or let the human being grow. And I will stop here. So, a human being, in order to start being a human being with a different kind of inner articulation, needs to understand that this disability can be physical but not psychological or mental, because people assume it as a mental disability, although people are smart and are mentally well, but they cannot articulate that process. That disability is the one that I am addressing. This process that is led to an extreme where it is difficult for a subject to be articulate. Okay, so they can say whatever, but there is this conditionality in this category that is used, and it's the one that is imposed to say you cannot. This is what we have, this is what you got. So it becomes a tragedy. Maybe it's a lifestyle that doesn't let the individual grow. And actually, you evolve to become yourself, but more minimized. And I say that with special knowledge of people I have dealt with and people who have made it out of that situation, who rose above it, and people who chose a different path. So within that logic is what I'm trying to, or where I'm trying to stay. So I can be a bit polemic, but it's not polemic actually. It's a choice. You can choose to stay there, and you stay there with all of the obstacles and everything against them. And we have stories that of people who reached different levels. They were differently humanized in the sense that they developed their spirit, their level of awareness, the way that they were linked or in touch with nature or their own nature. That's what I'm talking about. So, how do we break that conception or that perception that makes us condemn one another? Uh, People used to say, like, oh, he cannot move. Can't you see that he can't move? You can't see that they can work, they cannot exercise, or they're having trouble moving. And that's why we need to resignify the disability category. So if we move into this clarity of whatever is bodily and the resignification of the category, we need to think of the actions that allow for us to have an individual with a understanding and the fact that they are uncomfortable within their body, they need to make it comfortable for it to be overcoming disability in a psychological and emotional level. So I mean that even with this concept of what's bodily and the body and the resignification of the category of disability, I haven't I don't want to use an epistemological change in the word, but we have that in that plane. It's more like the resignification, what it implies to say I'm not disabled. I can. I mean, I have a circumstance. It could be physical. It could be in terms of mobility and coordination. Maybe a gunshot, for example, or a blunt force on my spine. We don't know. But the problem is how to understand that this is a process to first build your work with the body of that person. I'm going to give you a very simple example. If we think that a person moves, I'm going to move my arm, for example, here. If they move their arm and they open their hand and or move it around, and then we say, now move it with your mind without moving it, just move it. That movement is going to allow a connection with their body condition in a different level. So here's where I have my hand, but I don't move it here. I'm just moving it with my head. So I'm moving it, I keep moving it, and I make my body, you know that the brain has a plasticity and it has a series of neurological processes, but we have the possibility to make the subject or the individual understand that there are two possibilities of movement. Even if that person cannot move their arm, their leg, because of the bone marrow condition or whatever, they cannot move, but they can make a recognition or an inner recognition movement by moving it with the head, sending the signal. It's not going to move. Let's just not get over ourselves, okay? They're not going to raise their hand if they cannot move, of course. But your body is a category, and it has a bodily memory. And in that memory, you can move it and you can use it as you will, as you wish. So it's the location and the placement of that movement, and you can actually do it. Let's say a broken bone marrow cannot move, and I agree. You cannot move it. I am not hallucinating. I'm aware of the fact that you cannot move it. But if I do this exercise, an individual can start articulating their interior. And this is not a hallucination. There's a system, an apparatus that moves and checks. You can check it out and you see that the movement of energetic information increases. It's not going to be moved, I agree. But what it's going to do is to restitute a process of inner articulation. So I am in this state, but I can move. So we say the mind can go where the hand cannot go in. So that means that I can move. And if I understand that this is an energetic process I have in my body, I need to understand that we have three important categories. We have a body, we have an energy, an inner energy that moves us, which is the beginning of life. The beginning of life is there, but this body is not dead. It's disabled. There's a lack of movement, whatever you want, but it's there. It's not complete 100%, but it's there and it has life and it wants to live. So this child or this adult, this young person wants to live. And so we get a body a principle of life in the body that becomes an energy, and that body has information. These three categories are very important in the construction or bodily construction process when your mind learns to move that information within the body, because it has a memory, it has an emotional, cellular, and a inner process memory that was altered through I don't know, violence or whatever, but that body is there. So we have to think that this disability can be altered, changed, but in the everyday exercise. It doesn't mean that this is a speech, it's an everyday condition. You do it, you work out every day. I will show you a small exercise to show that this is feasible. So you can put your hands like this, like just evenly together, like a mirrored hand. So you put your hands down and you make a fist and then inhale. And then we push our hand like towards, like 3 or 4 times, like strongly. We send with our mind, we send the energy, the breathing, if you will, the chi, if you want to say, to call it that, the energy, the desire, whatever you want. This is with a person who can move their arm. They can do it physically. You move it around, you send the energy around. It needs to breathe, exhale, and you push it out. Then, once we did, we put here, and actually my fingers grew up a little bit. They grew a little bit. That means that my body can send an energy that it has, breathing that it has, and it can move. So this is physically. But that can be done without movement, like a fixed actual physical movement. But I can do that movement with my mind without moving my hand, and the feeling of articulating the body, if I don't move it, becomes getting articulated. And that is a process to overcome a disability. We have done it. We've done it for years, actually. We've worked with people in that field, and it works. That's why we take some texts where we talk about these three elements and the resignification of this category and the exercises we have to develop this process with whomever needs or has a disability. Even with people who don't have a disability, we also think that there is a disability for people who are normal. Let's say if they don't have any physical problem, they could have a physical disability, which is the process of not developing their body as a an important process of growth, in inner growth. So this wouldn't be exclusive for people who had an injury. It's exclusive or for any individual who wants to overcome the degree of being a human being with a more sublime condition. What do I mean by that? I mean that there is a process that states that if a human being cannot reach a degree of whatever is humane, it stays in an animal like state. And that is primary development. And that's why many people cannot move to different levels, because they don't do any personal work that reaches a different field or plane. And I'm not talking about a disrespectful plane. We're talking about professionals. And actually, this is a professional work. That's where you reach a level of understanding of your life. And you have a wider, more complex, and better understanding. You have a spiritual memory or emotional memory that you have been keeping there for a while, and it hurts you. We have done some research with people with cancer, for example, or a problem of another chronic degenerative diseases, and we've done it. One, it was a doctorate, and the other one was a master's degree. And there was we have interviewed thousands of people, And we found that there is a point of correspondence with a chronic and degenerative disease. And there's this deconstruction. This is not hereditary. This is a personal construction process for a family, personal and individual. So that's why it is important to understand what a body is and that the body is inhabited by an individual. That individual gets to decide and actually does decide a personal process that implies hurting or injuring, or the body is overcome by the desire for sugar, pleasure. Anyone who is addicted to sexuality, uh, any addiction you might have, and actually that process has to do with a disability, to understand who you are, what you want in a growth process.
And this is led to us by this. We can work with this with many people with disabilities. 25 years in this center, we've been able to work with Claudia there. So the problem is how to understand this process is not exclusive for a person or organic state, but it's a human condition. So I cannot come and say that there's disabled people. No, they are human beings with a different circumstance from other people, but they are the same as the other people that does not grow spiritually or psychologically or emotionally or in human relations that are healthy. We know that story of people that have a disability and they became violent, moody, or whatever you want. So this means that there is no process of relentless of a what a human being is. So it stays in this uh, stage. So we have to work with any person, either with a physical condition or not. So this is our proposal. And I'm not talking about here to say that a person is special. No, all human beings, all human species is special because we are individuals. The point here is how we understand this process of the normal or with disabilities. It's a very old decision. Nowadays, we believe it's something we cannot discuss about, but we have to talk about how we can develop this human being with this little or great problem in order to grow as an individual in the human condition. So, in this sense, that we have mentioned that he can move these energy from the body, and this is not under discussion. There's no witchcraft. It's a scientific, serious movement that are research and ways to feel it and ways to visualize it. It's a personal work that has to do with the idea of being an individual that grows socially, harmoniously related to others, and makes the other people with a physical disability would be able to find an articulation in a body in unity. I hope I have been able to be clear. I tried to synthesize this. If anybody has wants to get more information, you can come into Hawa Institute, and we have lots of material and research material. So I think this is what I would be able to give or contribute with to this discussion. So I hope I was clear with my words, Fernando. I think this would be it from my part. And if there are any questions, I would be glad to answer them. Thank you very much. Pretty good. So thank you, Sergio. Well, yeah, you're right. The idea is that each and every one of you would share and generate different ideas. So I have a question that I will raise. And it was said that according to what the panelists have said, can we suppose or assume that disability has also been acknowledged in ways of thinking about the human possibilities. So I would like to hear your answers. There are some other questions that fortunately we have plenty of time, but that to me seems to be important. So what would you be able to say, Flavia, Liliana, yourself, Sergio, please? What would you say about this? Well, I believe that we would have to get rid of the word disability from our vocabulary and talk about a process of construction of a human being. He is built on an everyday basis. He's got accidents, violence, and ways of expression. So, and I believe that sometimes it's more rather than stigmatizing people, because we know that people that have worked hard and fought and have focused on themselves and have been able to conquer very, very valuable things for humankind than others that are not implicated in the process. And that does not mean that everyone has to be focused on this. But I would also think of being a human being that lives their life and they can be happy with it and they can be happy with their life and their body so that they can do whatever they want to do. So I believe in the future we should think more in terms of how to build human beings that may be able to reach another level of spiritual development, because what we will have is a spiritual crisis. We've seen this with the pandemic. Many people committed suicide, many other people got sick, another had crisis. They went to the psychiatrist or the psychologists. So this showed us the poverty of this way of life and conditions. So that we have to reflect on these, considering this process, and has to do that we have to change the ideas of what we have about the diseases, because we have a new reality. This is a new reality. It is a naked body, and there's a new way to understand the process of building a human being. Because this way of living, we saw that it built only sick people. We have 120 something million people, but out of those 130 million people, we have 27 million people with diabetes, and 125,000 people with strokes, and many other people with breast cancer. And it's not, those figures are not going down since 1960. So it's a very inhuman system. So this is what we're talking about. So we have to give a turnaround, and the word disability has to be rethought, and that would be the what I would say, Fernando. Liliana, Dr. Liliana, what can you share us about this question? Well, I think that it is paramount to observe the integrality and in an integral way, to look at people with their disabilities and their context. Because if we take a look only at the condition of disability, then we're observing those limitations not that the person that with disabilities only has, but we're also taking a look at the surroundings and the society, generating lots of limitations that halt us from generating this integration. So it is important to understand this, and maybe I'm repeating the very same word, because what we're at first we're people, and the added condition in this case, given for a medical diagnosis, or the same society that halts us from live in a complete way, leads us to accept that there are some limitations within this space. I agree with Dr. Lopez in the sense that many of the efforts that a human being has to generate come from the decision of that comes from their own. And this is pretty important because it generates growth and the transcendence to other levels as human beings. Nevertheless, we cannot neglect that we are social beings, and we're submerged in an environment that, due to the lack of opportunities and the transcendence of other age and other people, that they give us some barriers. So if I am disabled and I use a wheelchair in order to move myself, my motivation may be so great in order to reach the goal, in this case, the study centers. I can find the people that I can get support from in order to have access to these spaces, even though there are several physical obstacles like stairs, and my good attitude will allow me to find people to support me with. Nevertheless, it's important to consider always that it is always the society who does not know how to live in diversity. So, in this terrain, it is paramount to notice that as disabled people, we are social beings, and our evolution, our development, and our incorporation to a life environment depends on the society, which many times, because they do not know or due to the lack of observation, does not allow us to have inclusion, especially in accessibility matters. That's what I would say. Thank you. Thank you. Flavia, anything you would like to share with us from this question? Well, I believe it is not a question to be answered just like that, or whether yes or no, or with an explanation. I believe it is a question that makes us reflect, and I would believe it's good to have it in different spaces. And I absolutely agree with the doctor, and likewise with Sergio's words. I believe that our society has formed disasters, and they came to flourish or be evident with the COVID pandemic. And logically, the people with disabilities are within this process also. They came to become visible, the topics that these people have to face all the time. So I would believe that we have to rethink on how to rebuild our surroundings, the way we think and act, so that we would really generate inclusive, real processes, not only for people with disabilities, but also for all the groups. But kids and girls, for youngsters, for elderly people, male and females, and for people that live in rural areas, indigenous people, you know, all the groups that historically have been discriminated. So I believe they are processes that we have to rethink. And I believe that the issue of disability plays us or gives us a chance to reflect about it. Thank you. There is another question that has to do with what you have said, and it's the same. The experience with the pandemic has led us to all the ways of disability, or has increased disabilities that we have already had. What would you say about this? Did did it generate new ways of disabilities, or made the disabilities we had greater? If you allow me to answer, I would say both things. I would say that it allowed us to visualize conditions of disability, due to the fact that in some way or another these were like hidden by the life pace that we had. Nevertheless, beyond that, it allowed us also to see some other disabilities and related directly to the relationship between people, amongst the same living spaces, with people, families, couples within our homes. We were able to see that the social relationships were in somehow, some way fragmented. And I believe the pandemic was a big challenge, that which very hardly was overcome by a important number of people, because when we had these conditions that were not expected, we saw many things that were already there, but still they became visible. The topic of empathy with the other person, the fear of not being able to deal with the many situations we faced, and only willing to generate uh, to survive, and not generating community conditions of life, so that they would say, protect yourselves, but by your door you may have somebody to help. So rather than disabilities, I would say that they are conditions that disable you, because in order to talk about disability, we're talking about other elements. Thank you. Flavia and Sergio, thank you. Well, in reality, I wouldn't say anything else from what I have already said. You know, I think it disclosed the pandemic and everything that was hidden or kept, and it showed a society or politicians that do not care about life, and they were not worried about life. So I believe that's what it showed. And it's not like it created new disabilities, but it made those existing worse, and it showed the poverty as human beings that we have. So I would add this to the topic of the pandemic. Thank you, Flavia. Well, I would not just leave the responsibility to politicians, indeed, but also to human beings in general. We've lived situations in the communities now with the famous pandemic, where indeed they have become worse for the good and for the bad also, where we saw evidently discrimination situations with people that had been infected with COVID and some other situations. So I do believe indeed that it made evident many things, but I also think it's a great opportunity, because when we see things and things come out, we can face them and work with them, and it's a responsibility that we share all together, and we have to transform those. Hello? Were you over, Fla? Yeah, I was over. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. There is another question. This is for Dr. Liliana, and it says, if the way you've been working, do you consider the same coverage in rural population and urban population? And besides that, what do you think generates violence? What have you talked about? What have you done about it? Violence against disabled people. Well, first of all, we've found serious difficulties in order to work at a rural zone level. But nevertheless, we've done that with the surveillance of the area of the Ecuador in the Amazonian zone, with indigenous people directly, whom we've given the information to, which is basic information and needed information, to give them the first support and then address them. And obviously, at resource level, it is hard to compare the attention at the urban level and the rural level, and those spaces that are difficult to have access to due to the conditions that we do not have the technology needed, it limits this. So, nevertheless, I want to stress that the support from the indigenous communities and rural communities in their spaces have given support to give this first aid and then allowed to generate a work with these people. Secondly, what generates violence? Well, I believe that in this case in particular, where we interfere with the area of children and women, this is a historic process that we've been working with or has been managed. The incivilization of public policies, that need of working with the identity in girls and women has generated, not empowered with of their own lives and rights, but they depend on every sense public policies, and I believe it is necessary to quote them. It's not for everyone. There are very strong barriers that, if not worked immediately, then there would have a very, very uh, terrible results. Violence is generated by violence. There's a circle, and when we do not identify this early and we look for the ways to eradicate it, we naturalize it and normalize it. So this is what we have been living for a long time, mainly within these sectors. And even more when in these sectors we have girls and women that have conditions of intersectionality, which are more representative. And as I was saying previously, they belong to the LGBTQ groups, indigenous people, Afro descendants, and they have gender conditions that are not socially accepted, and in some way pinpoints them or locates them in unacceptable spaces socially. There is a question here for Piña Palmera, Flavia, and it talks about or asks if, given the way you work, the work model in the community would allow you to deal simultaneously with the linkage or relationship between the people with disabilities and other social groups. And that question is formulated in the sense that you make us think that every time you help elderly people, gender violence, and disability, they are like separated groups, when indeed, in reality, they're ways that affect a community simultaneously. Because even in families where we have several things at the same time, would you consider that the community approach would allow you to overcome these differences if there are any? Well, I think that a community approach is a community approach, and the communities leave all the topics and groups that affect each and every group. So obviously, if you work with a community strategy, then you must have to be interrelating or interrelated with all the groups that live and mingle there. So it is paramount to generate an interrelationship among all the groups, because we could not work only with the people with disabilities as if they were like little ghettos. They live in an environment and relate themselves with the other groups. So what we want to change is the environment, the way of acting, and the processes that may be generating inclusion and participation. The change towards social justice processes, not only to people with disabilities, but also to all people that are subject of discrimination, isolation, and other issues that place them in disadvantage. So it is fundamental, and it has been the greater force of strategy that we've been using. Thank you. So thank you, Flavia. One question for Sergio. They ask you, Sergio, if you would, there wouldn't be a chance to have that when you work with the people that you call the category of the body and the corporality, the double categories. It wouldn't be possible if, when working with this category, with categories, would lead you to a individualistic way of life. Well, no. Well, people live individually, and what they do individually have collective impact all the time, regardless if they want or not. There is always an impact on the individual development at a collective level. One is to be autistic or somebody that does not want to share or socialize. That is being selfish. But all individuals have an individual practice, and we all have an impact with our immediate beings, with people at work, with the school, and the people that live with us. But if we have a social project, such as having a center, the practice of this center will depend on a person, individual. So somebody thought about it, and they had the idea, they had the willingness and the project and an energy and resources to do it. So thinking if this person is going to be individualistic, it would all depend on many things, because as I said, this is only the exercise. This leads us to a way of work. It's a practice that is sustained collectively from the individual part, or from the individual part having an impact on the collectiveness. So all the practices that I have would impact 10, 15, 30, or 20,000 people, and the people I reach. Selfishness is another thing. So I would say about this in order to have a different judgment. So we have to leave this. This is not only theory. We have to leave that and we have to exercise it. Thank you very much, Sergio. One last question also for everyone is, what would you recommend to do for any person on a daily basis, with the purpose of uh, allowing the development of a person with disabilities on everyday life? What would your tips be, or what would you consider in order to integrate a person with disabilities in the development of an everyday life? I believe that I think of two words that I think of. One is self love and empathy. Self love from the person with disabilities, identifying and accept that their lives, the action of their lives, has the necessary value and they deserve to live their lives with conditions of quality and warmth. And the other one, identifying empathy towards the society, because regardless of the fact that our actions are ours, they are individual, this social echo has to be empathic with the spaces and elements and conditions that me as a person with disability would require to be observed. Definitely for me, self love and empathy. That's it. Thank you. Liliana? Flavia? Well, I believe that it would be very important to be open, every one of us, every day, to new things, to new learnings, to new relationships, to different things. And that would help a lot to generate actions from the individual part, as Sergio said, and that would really positively impact collectively. And do not close ourselves with our own truths. Thank you. Well, yeah, sorry a little bit. I remember at a session in Peña Palmera when somebody asked, what things would Malena give, as you said in the video? And one of the discussions that were said is it was an example of learning to live with patience and humbleness without stopping to contribute. Would you share that idea, Flavia? Definitely.
Yes, with joy. Thank you. Of course. Okay, Sergio, should we close? I would recommend three things. For people not to lose their ability to get mad at something, to fall in love with someone, and to be odd. That integrates any subject with any problem into a society. And I don't get lost there because I don't get the ability to be mad at something, to fall in love, or with me, or for me to get involved with whatever is happening around me. That's what I go where. Yeah, and also for it to derive into a false rebelliousness, let's say, something alternative, right? Yes, that's right. To be odd is to say, well, look at that flower there. There's the hummingbird, and I get in awe. I'm in awe, and I am articulated with that condition, and I get mad because someone with a disability is mistreated, or there are no ramps, for example. I get mad, but I don't just get mad. I do something, and I get awed by the fact that the person did something wonderful, like living, doing something wonderful, being happy, achieving something in their life. I think that is what's most important in an integration with someone in a space, whether it be with a family or a group. Well, thank you very much. I think that we have a very good complement of the presentations with the responses and the answers you gave. All likewise, I want to remind you that Dr. Dace's question was whether or not we were able to continue to communicate with you. This will not be the only activity to be carried out. There is an intense work plan from the CS, and we will be sharing it with you at the due time. And with this, we finish this webinar, and I give the floor to my colleague Paulina. Sorry, Anna, to just close this webinar. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, thank you very much, every panelists, to all of our panelists for your input from the Inter-American Center for Social Security Studies. We thank you for covering this activity. Uh, we would like to say that we have some points that we can conclude on. First of, with the participation of our first panelist who talked about women and girls with a disability going through the strategy of rehabilitation based in and on the community, the applications of a disability from a psychological perspective, and how to understand of the process of deconstruction with mind and body, which is extremely relevant. Of course, disability in the Americas is a one that has a big repercussion, both socially and economically, but we don't have enough data, and that's why a lot of policies and programs are based on estimates, which are sometimes far away from the truth, or far from reality. And that's why it is important for governments and the civil society should highlight the importance of disability as an issue and giving concrete answers, not just from the national perspective, but also internationally, through international entities. I think that is a very important task we need to cover. Uh, as we know, people with disabilities have the worst results, both sanitary and economic, lower political participation, and they're also far away from many services that are obvious to most people. People with disabilities have a difficulty to go or to have access to them, and that's why from the Inter-American Center for Social Studies, we have that dialogue, and we invite you to join these webinars to help us have a link with the society and get acquainted with topics like as important as today's topic. Thank you to every participant, every panelist, my colleague Fernando, and on behalf of Dr. Daisy Corrales, who is the director of this Inter-American Center, we thank all of your participations. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good luck, everyone. And something important is we will keep in touch. Thank you. Thank you.